And we continue with our coverage of the DRC conflict, and that's where the focus now has moved to this weekend's joint East African and Southern African Development Communities Summit. Now, this is aimed at finding a lasting solution to the war. Last night, the M23 rebels announcing a ceasefire to allow for humanitarian assistance to reach those in need. Let's speak now to the DRC's Foreign Minister, Therese Wagner. Foreign Minister, good evening to you, and thank you very much for making time for us. I'd like to start with that last element about the ceasefire. How long do you expect it to hold, and also important, the form of humanitarian assistance that's needed in Eastern DRC right now?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that very important question, because right now when we look at the city of Goma, it is indeed the extremely preoccupying humanitarian situation which is at the forefront. The M23 has issued a unilateral ceasefire on humanitarian grounds. We have yet to see what that means concretely. For humanitarian solutions and for humanitarian access to be reestablished, first of all, we would need Goma to be demilitarized. We would need the M23 to leave immediately, as well as the Rwandan Defense Forces, which are de facto occupying a sovereign part of the DRC. Second of all, when we speak of humanitarian access, we cannot deny the fact that in a very targeted manner, in their onslaught onto the city of Goma, the Rwandan Defense Forces and the M23 cut the electricity supply lines, cut the water lines, cut all access routes, all roads leading in and out of Goma, and also took control over the airport. So if we want to be frank and sincere about so-called concerns for humanitarian reasons, then it does beg the question in terms of the methods that were used by the Rwandan Defense Forces and by the M23 in their attack on Goma, which led to the deaths of thousands of civilians. Now, we need to see concrete actions to see what this really means and to have the evidence that this is not a cosmetic fix, because the world is waking up to the horror that Kigali and the M23 have unleashed on Goma, and that there is some serious intent. But the actions of the M23 until now show us otherwise. They have no respect for human lives. They have no respect or understanding of international humanitarian law.
Yeah, I'll come back to the point about the Rwandan forces that you say are in your country. At the moment, the South African government is anxious to repatriate its soldiers who died and those that were injured during the January assault. Are you aware of any of these plans? Can you share anything about the execution of this planned repatriation?
First of all, allow me to reiterate on my personal behalf, but also on behalf of my country and my government, our sincere condolences for the great sacrifice of South African soldiers in the DRC. This was not the first time. South Africa has stood by us for many years. We will forever be in debt towards the families, but also the country of South Africa. These are strong bonds that hold us together, but I did want to reiterate our sincere condolences. Now, looking forward in terms of the extraction and the ongoing efforts to extract both wounded peacekeepers as well as peacekeepers who have fallen in the line of duty, there are ongoing efforts, and there are very consistent efforts and persistent efforts to make sure that these evacuation routes, if you want, are activated. But again, this brings us back to the narrative that the M23 is pushing of a humanitarian ceasefire and the reality on the ground, which is one that actually, when pushed and when pressed, does not materialize into action that is favorable. This does not mean that efforts are not ongoing. I will not be at liberty to go into the details of the numerous efforts and the numerous negotiations happening in the background. Yeah. But I do want to reassure you, first of all, that the government of South Africa, but also the government of the DRC, have been working tirelessly with other partners and stakeholders in order to find a solution to this very challenging situation, in particular for the families of the fallen peacekeepers.
Yeah, I appreciate the sensitivity of some of this information, but let me just quiz you on the evacuation routes that you are talking about, and you mentioned the M23. Could these be in part that these evacuation routes are going to be through Rwanda? And if so, what would the attitude of the DRC government be vis-a-vis that of the South African government, for example? Because this evacuation, as we hear, is expected to take place tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Of course, again, the urgency and the sensitivity of the issue means also that no stone can be left unturned. Does that mean that every option is the most favorable? Certainly not. And I think that there is needs for pause to make sure that each option is being analyzed. But again, I will not delve into speculations. I think it is of an utmost priority for South Africa to be able to recover both to evacuate both the wounded soldiers, but also to recover the bodies of those fallen in the line of duty. And we have full respect for that. And we are being as supportive as we can whilst we try to identify the most sustainable and the most pertinent and effective route to make sure that this happens in as soon as possible.
Yeah. Let's go back then to Rwandan forces that you say are in your country. Rwanda will say, give evidence to support your claims.
Sure. You know, it's not just the DRC that's saying it, but let's start with the DRC and what the DRC is saying. The government has been saying it, but more importantly, it is our fellow countrymen and fellow countrywomen who are currently living under the occupation of the Rwandan Defense Forces who tell us so. In addition to that, I think it is very important to emphasize the flood of declarations that have been, pouring out in the past weeks, denouncing the presence of the Rwandan Defense Forces on sovereign Congolese soil. First of all, the statement by the Secretary General of the United Nations. Then, if you listen to the verbatim of the 2 meetings of the United Nations Security Council deliberation, where basically every member of the council denounced and condemned the presence of Rwanda on Congolese soil. When you look at the report of the United Nations group of experts that also spoke of at least 4,000 troops, Rwandan troops being present, the only voice, the G7 statement that was issued yesterday or 2 days ago, the only voice in all of this that claims that Rwanda is not present doesn't even claim that Rwanda isn't present. That only voice says it doesn't even know whether the troops are in the DRC or not.
Yeah. And you making reference to President Kagame, who was interviewed on the American news channel CNN overnight. Let me then move on from that question, because in that interview, President Kagame is asked about the smuggling of the coltan mineral from the DRC, allegedly by Rwanda, to be sold off to international markets. And I just want to read you his exact response in this regard. And we are going to try and see if you can beam some of that on the screen. He says, the people who are benefiting from minerals of Congo more than anybody else are South Africa and these other Europeans who are making noise about it. Is that your understanding as well?
I'm not really sure what he refers to when he says these other Europeans, bearing in mind that South Africans are not Europeans, but that's maybe just a side comment on my end. I think, again, in such a situation of conflict between 2 countries, you will always have 2 sides of the story. You will always have the Congolese version and the Rwandan version. And this is why I bring us back to the closest we have to a common denominator. And this is a report of the United Nations group of experts. Again, this report does not talk about smuggled coltan going to South Africa. It doesn't talk about smuggled coltan going to, what did they call them? These other Europeans who are making noise? No. The report of the group of experts speaks about 150 metric tons mined illegally by children, women, men under forced labor, under the threat of violence by the Rwandan Defense Forces and the M23 in the Rubaya mine. Those 150 tons of coltan being then smuggled into Rwanda, treated in Rwandan facilities, and then sold off to the international market as Rwandan minerals. This is why we insist on greater transparency and accountability on the value chain when it comes to natural resources such as coltan. This is why we have also called on the Security Council to put a full ban and embargo on minerals that are being traded by Rwanda under a Rwandan label, where we know very, very certainly that they do not come from Rwanda.
Yeah.
And this is why there needs to be greater accountability for this misuse and this misuse of the label of claiming that certain minerals are from Rwanda when they are not. They are pillaged from the DRC under inhumane conditions.
Foreign Minister, I'd like for you to just set the record straight, because this element about the minerals of Congo has found expression in the South African Parliament today, where the members of Parliament were questioning the Defense Minister about the exact role of the SANDF in this semi-DRC mission. And the direct accusation is against the President, whom they say is protecting his business interests using the South African military. Can you set the record straight on that? Are those claims true?
Well, first of all, I have full respect for the domestic nature of the debate. And so I know better than to weigh in a debate that is as sensitive, but that is as necessary as the different duty bearers deem it to be in order to be held at the level of the Parliament. What I can say is that the South African National Defense Forces present in the DRC are not there on a whim. They are not there based on a personal agreement or on a one-to-one agreement between individuals. They are there under the mandate of the United Nations when it comes to those serving under the MONUSCO peacekeeping missions, or under the mandate of the SAMI DRC, which is a military mission that was authorized and mandated by the AU, by the African Union. So I think there is a legal basis in both cases, be it for MONUSCO or for SAMI DRC, that explains the presence of South African troops in the DRC, but that also lays out what they are there for. And those mandates are very well articulated in both cases, both the case of SAMI DRC and the case of MONUSCO.
Final question on this matter. The legitimate sale of coltan minerals, Foreign Minister, and when I say legitimate sale, by the DRC government, who is the government's biggest buyer of these minerals?
I would want to refer you for specifics to our Minister of Mine. In all transparency, I believe that it would be the People's Republic of China, but I would have to cross-check with my colleague, the Minister of Mines. I think there's a, especially when we speak of the legal sale of mines, so it means that we're looking at mines that are being operated by countries and by entities that have mining contracts. And so I would believe that it would be largely by the People's Republic of China.
Yeah.
But this is something that we can easily cross-check with my colleague, the Minister of Mines, who is probably still in South Africa attending mining in Daba. So maybe worth a call.
We'll certainly try and catch up with the Minister of Mines from the DRC. Let's wind this down, Foreign Minister. A resounding call on United Nations member states to use their influence to end this war. And this was actually made on the 26th of January in that emergency meeting in which you were present in January. And since then, the M23 has been expanding its reach and presence in Goma. Is the UN Security Council a dependable body to try to end this war, in your view?
The UN Security Council is first and foremost the responsible body. So I do want to reiterate also that whilst we are unsatisfied with the degree and with the rapidity or with the swiftness or the lack thereof of concrete actions by the Security Council, we do need to remind ourselves that we are countries that are members of the UN and that have abided to certain principles and certain rules. Certainly, the first responsibility is that of the Congolese government and the Congolese state, of course. But at the same time, we do have to acknowledge that in this instance, international peace and security are at stake, and this gives the United Nations Security Council the obligation to act because international peace is at stake and is endangered. And this is why we will not tire of reminding the Security Council of its shortcomings. We will not tire of reminding the Security Council of the fact that actions are more important and will have more impact than words. And we will not tire of holding them accountable to their shortcomings because we know what this can lead to on the long run. This is a region that has been marked, as you say, by many occurrences of the Security Council not necessarily acting. Now, does it mean that we remain in a stance where we only base our hopes on the United Nations Security Council? Certainly not. We have mobilized different entities and different bodies within the country and the DRC. We are also mobilizing. This is, if you want, this is a fight that is happening on many, many fronts. But it doesn't mean that we accept to neglect one of the fronts that would be the multilateral one. So we're working on many levels at the same time. Of course, certain of them or some of them may seem more visible. They get more coverage in the media, but that does not mean that the efforts are being spared elsewhere where they're also necessary.
Final question. The scheduled meeting of the SADC bloc with its East African community counterpart, they are scheduled to meet this weekend. Do you believe that a solution, a possible lasting solution, could come from that meeting when there's so much bad blood, it would seem?
Well, you know, I think it is indeed a moment where, in particular, we as Africans, it's a moment of reckoning. I find it particularly distressing when in 2025 we find ourselves in such harrowing situations, the scenes that we have seen from Goma. I find it unbearable that in 2025 we find ourselves in situations where Africans kill other Africans. This is not just talking about Rwandan forces killing Congolese, but also South Africans, but also people from Malawi, but also people from Tanzania. So I think this is a moment where I really hope that everyone goes beyond their personal egos, goes beyond whatever has motivated them to engage in such inhumane actions that have led to so many years of suffering, and that we understand as Africans that this is the moment where we change, we reverse the tide, and that we open a new chapter that is actually, you know, one where we can look at the potential that we have as a continent and seize that potential in a productive manner and, you know, make sustainable strides towards prosperity. This is unacceptable that in one of the most richest regions in the world, we're there fighting with each other as if we had made no progress whatsoever as Africans, both legally speaking, both from a point of view of just humanity. This is such a setback for humanity and for our understanding of what it means to be African.
And just briefly, Minister, will President Tshisekedi be present at this meeting at the weekend?
President Tshisekedi will participate in the meeting.
Thank you very much for your time. That is the Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Therese Wagner.